My name is Aurora Hayes, and the moment my parents walked into my living room with a realtor, I knew chaos was coming. My mom crossed her arms and said, "We're selling this dump. Losers like you should pay rent." My dad just nodded, smug and confident. For a second, I froze, taking in the audacity. They had assumed I was powerless, that I had no control over the house I had worked for, dreamed about, and secured long before their judgment ever mattered. But they didn't know the truth. My name was on the deed. Every inch of this house legally belonged to me. I let them continue their performance, letting their assumptions fill the room. Their words, meant to intimidate, only fueled a quiet, simmering determination inside me. I pictured every step I had taken to ensure independence, every careful decision I had made while they were busy doubting me. By the time the realtor asked me to sign papers, I smiled softly. The control they assumed they held had already slipped through their fingers. They had no idea what I was about to do, or how quickly I could turn this confrontation into a lesson they would never forget. Everything they thought they controlled was about to change. The realtor shuffled papers nervously, clearly sensing the tension, while my parents continued their theatrics. "You can't do this," Mom said, her voice sharp, but I stayed calm. I didn't need to raise my voice. My legal ownership of the house spoke louder than any tantrum. I moved deliberately, every step measured. I had spent years building a life they assumed I couldn't sustain. Every bill I'd paid, every renovation I'd completed, every contract I'd signed, all of it had been carefully planned so moments like this couldn't shake me. By the time the confrontation reached its peak, my parents realized something crucial. Their judgment held no weight here. I wasn't just defending a house. I was asserting my independence, my authority, and my ability to act decisively when challenged. That evening, as I watched them leave the living room muttering under their breath, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Their assumptions, their attempts to intimidate me, had failed. Every step I had taken to secure my life, my future, and my independence had positioned me exactly where I needed to be. Everything they had underestimated, the patience, the planning, the quiet confidence, was now undeniable, and I was ready to show them just how powerless their arrogance truly was. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of messages from relatives who had heard about the confrontation. Curiosity, surprise, even a hint of admiration threaded through their texts. My parents, meanwhile, remained silent, their pride bruised and their control slipping with every passing hour. I moved through my day with quiet precision, checking bills, reviewing plans, and making calls for projects I had been building in secret. Every move reinforced the life I had quietly constructed: independence, security, and control, things my parents had always assumed I lacked. By evening, one of my cousins texted, almost hesitantly, "Aurora, we didn't realize you'd manage all this." I smiled softly, knowing words weren't necessary. My calm certainty and deliberate actions had already made the point. That night, I reviewed my future plans, imagining every scenario they thought could unseat me. Each time, I realized their assumptions were irrelevant. They had underestimated patience, foresight, and quiet strength, the tools I had used to build a life untouchable by their arrogance. Everything they thought they controlled, the house, the narrative, the perception of my power, was quietly dissolving. And I was ready to step fully into a future defined entirely on my terms. By midweek, the shift in the family dynamic became obvious. Even casual relatives approached cautiously, speaking carefully, as if testing the waters. My parents' confidence wavered. The control they assumed they had was slipping, and their silence spoke volumes. I moved deliberately through my routines, checking accounts, finalizing projects, and ensuring every decision reinforced my independence. Their attempts to intimidate me had failed. Every careful step I had taken over the years had built a foundation too strong for their judgment or interference to shake. That evening, I revisited the house, walking through rooms that were mine by law and by effort. I imagined their surprise if they realized just how untouchable I had become. Every renovation, every detail I had chosen, every plan I had quietly executed, it all reinforced that I was no longer a passive player in their narrative. By the time the day ended, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't begged, I hadn't tried to prove myself. I had simply acted, building strength and independence in silence, until the world, including my parents, couldn't ignore it. Everything they assumed about me, their power, their influence, their control, was now quietly unraveling, and I was ready to claim the life they had tried to undermine. By the weekend, the change was undeniable. Relatives whispered cautiously, my parents' attempts at authority faltered, and even casual acquaintances began to notice a quiet confidence in me they hadn't seen before. I moved through my days deliberately, every action reinforcing the independence I had carefully built. The house, my finances, my choices, all of it belonged to me, and no one's arrogance or judgment could alter that reality. That afternoon, a cousin asked nervously, "Aurora, how did you manage all this?" I smiled faintly. Words weren't necessary. My life, my calm authority, and my deliberate steps had already spoken louder than any explanation could. That evening, I reviewed the house deeds, financial statements, and long-term plans I had been quietly executing for years. Each document, each accomplishment, was a reminder of my resilience and foresight. For the first time, I truly felt untouchable. Their attempts to manipulate, intimidate, or control me had failed entirely. Every assumption they had made about my strength, my patience, and my determination was now shattered. Everything they had underestimated, the careful planning, the quiet confidence, the resilience, had become undeniable. They could no longer control the narrative, and I was fully in command of my life. By the start of the following week, my parents' frustration had grown visible. They tried subtle manipulations, texts, indirect questions, even comments through relatives, but I remained calm, untouchable. Their control had slipped, and they knew it. I moved through my days with deliberate precision. Every action, every choice, reinforced the life I had built for myself. Independence, security, and control. Their attempts to intimidate or provoke me failed because I had already prepared for moments like this, quietly, over years. That evening, as I reviewed long-term plans and projects, I realized the full extent of my advantage. Their assumptions, their arrogance, their judgment, all of it had misjudged my patience, my foresight, and my quiet determination. I had built a life untouchable by their whims. Even when they tried indirect pressure, I stayed steady. I didn't need to explain myself, defend my choices, or argue. Their disbelief, their quiet unease, only reinforced the fact that I was now in full control. Everything they thought they could manipulate, the house, the finances, the narrative, was now completely untouchable. And as I moved forward, calm and deliberate, I felt the full weight of independence for the first time. By the middle of the week, the shift in power was undeniable. Relatives approached cautiously, whispering questions they wouldn't have dared before. My parents' authority had evaporated, replaced by a tense, frustrated silence that spoke louder than any argument ever could. I moved deliberately through my routines, reviewing accounts, checking on investments, planning projects. Every step reinforced the life I had carefully built, a life completely independent of their influence. Their attempts to intimidate me had failed, and they could feel it. That evening, I walked through the house, imagining their surprise if they truly understood just how untouchable I had become. Every renovation, every improvement, every quiet choice I had made over the years reflected my determination and my independence. Even when subtle threats or manipulation surfaced, I remained calm. I didn't need to react, to explain, or to prove myself. My strength was in silence, in foresight, and in the quiet confidence of a life I had built on my own terms. Everything they assumed about me, their power, their influence, their control, had been quietly dismantled. And for the first time, I realized just how unstoppable I had become, fully in command of the life they tried to undermine. The day finally arrived when my parents fully realized their miscalculation. I hosted a small gathering to celebrate a personal milestone, a project I had built entirely on my own. Invitations went out, but they were conspicuously absent, their silence a testament to the control they had lost. From a distance, I watched as family messages buzzed with confusion and disbelief. They had assumed fear, anger, or submission would follow their attempts at dominance, but instead, my calm certainty and deliberate actions had done all the talking. I moved through the evening with quiet confidence. Every smile, every gesture, every word I spoke was a subtle assertion of the life I had claimed for myself. I didn't gloat. I simply existed in the reality they had ignored for so long, a reality I had carefully and patiently built. By nightfall, the message was undeniable. I was no longer defined by their judgment or approval. Every attempt to control, shame, or intimidate me had failed. Independence, patience, and determination had accomplished what anger and manipulation never could. As the last guests left and city lights twinkled below, I felt an unshakable satisfaction. Everything they had tried to deny me, the strength, the resilience, the life they assumed I couldn't build, was now undeniable.